Welcome to the Godot community for elementary art teachers. My name is Mary Mullins and I'm your Elementary Art PLC moderator. Today's webinar discusses how I have my classroom set up, as well as my all-time favorite lesson to teach and tried and true strategies that work for me. Let's get started. I don't fit the typical art teacher mold. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not. I'm pretty OCD and like to keep my room neat, clean, and organized. This year, I'm super blessed because we now have a brand new building and my art room is absolutely amazing. This was my room for the past 12 years. Our school was 68 years old. When I started at this school, the room was in horrible condition and it took a good bit of time to get the room in decent shape. All of the furniture, decorations, as well as a kiln were purchased with art fundraising. It was obvious that the previous teachers, as well as admin, did not value the arts. With time and a lot of hard work, I was able to put us on the map, which in turn got my students, their families, my community, and our administrators excited about art. Thank goodness I had a few pictures so I could share them with you. I absolutely love my new art room. It's so much bigger and everything is brand new. Welcome to my brand new, beautiful art room. Due to the pandemic, I have kids spaced apart with assigned seats. The tables divided down the center with plastic sneeze guards suspended from the ceiling. I created these by cutting dowel rods the length of the table, drilled holes in order to attach the chains that are suspended from the ceiling. The upholstery plastic attached with clips was purchased from the local fabric store. I've placed vinyl feet on the ground in order for students to line up with some spacing in between them. I have a cool patio too. I can't wait to do some art out here. My students bring their own basic supplies with them to each class. These are my backup supplies for the students that forget them. Obviously, this is mission control, and I'll be discussing the setup momentarily. Remember I told you in the last webinar that I'm OCD? Well, this is the perfect example of that. I project the student assigned seats on the board so there's no question for the student as to where they sit. This year my administration team is requiring us to post our updated seating charts at the end of each day for contact tracing. So I decided to make a digital chart since it's a truly fluid year with changes daily. Since we are hybrid, I leave the virtual students in this box. If by chance they are changed over to face-to-face, I simply drag them to their assigned seat. When I need to move a student for behavior or whatever reason, I just move them to their new spot. I have over 1,100 students this year, and we are on an 8-day rotation. In order for me to keep up with the rotations, I've color-coded my rotation calendar, so these coordinate with our rotation weeks. We are currently on purple rotation. Students that are absent get this color-coded dot. If they are on my face-to-face roster but temporarily at home due to quarantine or some other reason and show up virtually, I give them this arrow to let me know they attended my class. Here is where I keep up with the number of absent students each week. I've also made a one-stop shop with a place to mark different behaviors, their efforts, and workmanship quality. By the way, I keep a hard copy where I mark these things. I would never display this part for any other students to see. I'll be honest, the setup like this takes time, but it's definitely worth it for me in the long run. In our previous webinar, I told you about my love for technology and figuring things out. I'm not sure how your school does things if you're a hybrid model, which is what we call teaching face-to-face kids at the same time as teaching the virtual ones. Through lots of trial and error, this is what works for me. First off, we have 6 45-minute classes a day with 10 minutes between class to prepare, sanitize the tables, and log into the next class for our virtual learners at home. Of course, you know it does not end up being 10 minutes because teachers seem to be early to drop off and late to pick up. For my hybrid lessons, I like to follow the same basic format of starting with a video short or book that I've recorded myself reading. These few minutes not only catch the attention of my students to get them excited about the lesson, it allows my virtual learners to all log in and gives me a moment to take a deep breath and get my bearings straight and prepare to teach. I originally used the method of sharing my screen like most of my teacher friends, but I found it was a bit stressful with all the necessary clicking. I personally prefer to project my laptop for my lessons and digital seating charts on the board and a second desktop computer for logging in with the virtual kids. When I'm teaching, I switch my desktop computer camera to my document camera, which is focused on my board, so the face-to-face and virtual learners all are seeing the same thing. By doing this, I can still see all of the students at home on my desktop and easily chat with them. Also, I have small, cheap speakers hooked up to the main desktop computer, so my students in the room can easily hear how the virtual learners are adding to our group discussions. Since our area has been like a yo-yo and moved full virtual several times, it's necessary for me to have my home set up for this. I keep these lessons a bit more simple and use a dual display. Dual display allows me to push my students onto my TV by adjusting the laptop settings and using an HDMI cable. I like being able to see all of my students while I'm screen sharing in order to demonstrate my lesson. I have a document camera connected and just switch the camera setting when I'm ready to change it. If you don't have a document camera or another camera to connect to your computer, you can use your iPhone or iPad. Teaching art is an art in itself. Art-making experience should be designed so they can reinforce the concepts that you teach. I find the Egyptian culture fascinating. It truly amazes me. Several years ago, I started researching and reading about it. It astonishes me the things that they accomplished with no electricity or technology. I was so intrigued, I decided to share my findings with my fifth graders. This digital storyboard is not perfect, but I made it to be fun and a way for me to convey some interesting facts that I've learned along the way. I hope you enjoy.
Hello, my name is King Tutankhamun. I'm also known as King Tut. At the age of 9, I became an Egyptian pharaoh when my father died. That was in 1333 BC. But unfortunately, I was only ruler for 10 years and met an untimely death myself. Today, I'd like to take you on a journey of my tomb. We believed in the life after death, so everything needed for the afterlife was buried with me in a place called a tomb. My tomb was located in a pyramid in Egypt, in a place called the Valley of the Kings.
I will be your tour guide for today. First, I'd like to introduce you to Howard Carter. He's the man on the left, and he's the archaeologist that discovered King Tut's tomb in 1922. Over to the right is Lord Carnarvon. He's a gentleman that financed the archaeologist's work of Howard Carter. They are actually standing in front of King Tut's burial chamber in this picture. The ancient Egyptians did not want anyone to enter the tomb, so once it was closed after the death, they concealed it extremely well. This is a map of the tomb that held the body of King Tut. Today, we are going to take a virtual look into each room. First, there were 16 steps that led to a long passageway with a completely sealed door at the end of the hall. The antechamber is the largest room and the first room of the tomb. This chamber contained many treasures like carved chairs, beds, chariots, and Tut's famous golden throne. This room was left almost untouched. It's assumed that tomb robbers had broken in more than once because everything was unorganized. They said that tomb robbers thrashed about the chariots in search of gold. From the antechamber, a hole in the wall leads into the annex, in which the majority of the king's personal items were stored. It included things he used in life and items needed for his next life, such as pots and pans, food, games, stools, vases, chests, figurines, clothing, and other personal items. The purpose of the small treasury room was to hold some of King Tut's most glorious pieces, such as statues, model boats, ornate chests full of treasures, items of pure gold, and pictures that showed King Tut's life. A little further down to the room was a large shrine that contained the organs of the pharaoh. Anubis was placed in the front of the room to protect those items for the king's afterlife. The burial chamber had the most important and glorious treasure ever found in Egypt, King Tut's mummy. This is a picture of his shrine. Inside of this one is another, and in that is another. It reminds me of the Russian nesting dolls that get smaller and smaller. But inside of the third one was a solid gold coffin called the sarcophagus that held the mummy of King Tut.
Well, hello there. You are looking at the golden coffin of King Tut, and that's Howard Carter gently cleaning it. Once the coffin was opened, there was a burial mask on the mummy's face. The mask of the mummy was very important. If the mummy's head was damaged, then Ba, the spirit, could recognize the body and return to it. The most famous death mask is that of King Tut. It was made of solid gold and had beautiful stones inlaid upon it. Not all masks were so elaborate. Some were made of paper mache and covered with a thin layer of gold. Speaking of mummies, mummification was mainly done to wealthy people. Ancient Egyptians believed that in order to reach the afterlife, the dead person would have to repossess his body, and this was the only way to preserve it. It's kind of gross and a bit strange, but they first pushed a hook through the nose and pulled out the brain and threw it away. Then a cut was made on the left side of the tummy in order to remove all internal organs. The lungs, intestines, stomach, and liver were each placed in canopic jars and eventually buried with the mummy. The corpse was stuffed, cleaned, covered with salt, and left to dry for 70 days. Then it was wrapped in linen and placed into the sarcophagus and taken to its final resting place.
I refer to my teaching style as eclectic because I like to change things up, which is most likely caused by my ADD. This particular lesson has morphed over time. Originally, when I taught this lesson, everyone did the same thing. I focused more on the Egyptian headpiece. The students used craft paper that was actually from opening up a brown grocery bag. Students would stand in front of the board and I traced their profile from the projector light. Then they took it back to their seat and designed the headpiece. They turned out very nice, but I had kids asking me if they could draw King Tut or one of the gods instead. And it got me thinking about giving kids choices in order for them to learn. This has now become a choice-based lesson where the students can actually choose what they want to create. It certainly takes a lot of organizing and prep work on my part, but it's totally worth it. I organize the choices in different areas of my room with printed explanations and supplies listed. Students are also free to come up with their own ideas that aren't listed. They just come to me and let me know what they're thinking. The first choice would be the cardboard construction. At this station, I provide cardboard, masking tape, Sharpies, scissors, construction paper crayons, hot glue, craft sticks, blue and gold acrylic paint, gold and silver spray paint, which I do myself, jewels, sequins, and anything else you might have available in your storage room or junk drawer. So I have students that create Egyptian headpieces, dioramas depicting a place in Egypt, 3D construction of pyramid. They make the mummy, a death mask, sarcophagus, ancient Egyptian animals. Lots of variety of things have come out of this station. This is the Fabric Design and Sewing Center. We have pencils, paper, fabric, Sharpies, construction paper crayons, color pencils, fabric crayons, yarn, string, needle, scissors, polyfill, and an iron. The project ideas for this station, we have people creating pillows, small bags, and fanny packs, and wall hangings. I have the students draw out their designs on paper with pencil first before giving them their fabric. This is the Ancient Artifact Painting Station. The supplies at this station include large brown craft paper, white drawing paper, or colored construction paper, pencils, Sharpies, construction paper crayons, color pencils, gold and blue acrylic paint, tan and brown watercolor paint. The ideas for this station could be King Tut, another Egyptian god, Cleopatra, pyramids, the Great Sphinx, an Egyptian headdress, ancient Egyptian style animal, hieroglyphics depicting a story. The next one is the jewelry making station. For this one, we have chain, beads, different findings for jewelry, cardboard, hole punchers, markers, and paint. These are not the best, but the kids begged to make them. Several students even made Egyptian friendship necklaces. Simona's ideas would be they could make a headpiece to wear. This cat you're looking at was actually created with craft paper and staples and stuffed with toilet paper. This is what gave me the idea to offer a sewing station last year. The death mask was made with modeling clay. and pressed and formed onto a piece of cardboard and then wrapped in aluminum foil, followed by paint and decorating. And this one student took the project to the next level. He made a mummy that was somewhat realistic and rubbed dirt on it. He built the sarcophagus that has a story written on top with hieroglyphics. I was absolutely blown away by this one. The remainder of this webinar shows various tried and true strategies that work for me. Feel free to use these as you wish. I'm sure many of you already use this Make Like Mona technique to capture the attention of your students. In the event that you don't, I find this a fun way to get their attention instead of having to yell out or clap my hands to get their attention. I introduce it on their first day of art by telling a bit about who she is and a couple of facts about the artist. Then I say something along the lines of, "Look at her, she is the perfect student. Her mouth is closed, her hands are still, her ears are listening, and her eyes are following me no matter where I go in the room." It's actually a little creepy. When I say Mona, you say Lisa. Did you notice that Lisa sounds kind of like the word listen? This is how I'm going to get your attention. It might be that it's time to clean up. Maybe the office called and you're checking out, or it could be that we're getting too loud. They've actually responded to this very well. Sometimes I have to say Mona a few times, but eventually they stop, look, and listen. Since I created this visual, you are free to print your own copy. It can be found under the Documents tab. Seating charts are a must. As I discussed in the video earlier, they are great for behavior management, learning students' names, as well as our newly added stress of contact tracing. If you have online learners, it's imperative that you let them know their expectations. I created this visual to cover our first day of digital class and occasionally have to revisit some of the expectations. I go over each area and give them examples along the way of things I've heard or seen while teaching. Feel free to use this with your students. I have placed a copy for you under the Documents tab as well. After my face-to-face students have been seated in my classroom and I'm letting in the rest of my virtual learners, I like to show a video short or a pre-recorded book about what we are learning. This allows me to check the roll, prepare to teach, and take a breath. It also keeps those late virtual stragglers from missing the main part of my lesson. Otherwise, I find myself having to repeat things multiple times to catch them up, which in turn takes away from me assisting the students that are already working and need my help. Speaking of virtual learners, getting them to turn in their work is like pulling teeth. I have tried multiple ways and platforms, but I have not had a lot of luck with this. For those of you interested, I will cover those platform choices in our next webinar. I've now reverted into having them show me their work before they sign off. I simply have them hold it up and make a quick note in my gradebook. A few students don't like to hold them up because they're embarrassed, so I have them send me a digital picture. I still like for my students to send a photo of their finished product, but like I said before, it's few and far between. Our school is having the students bring their own supply boxes with them to art each week. These are just basic supplies like pencils, erasers, crayons, colored pencils, scissors, and glue. I always have students that forget they needed to replace a pencil or lost a certain thing in their supply box. Therefore, I have supplies that they can borrow. I keep them on one side of my room in a box that says, or an area that says clean. If they borrow from my supplies, they place it in a container labeled need to be sanitized that's on the opposite side of my room. At the end of the day, I spray these with disinfectant and let them sit a couple of days before returning them to the clean area. If you use any online forums for documenting or digital portfolios, having a dedicated docking station in your classroom is a great way to do that. You can use one that is intended for that purpose, or you can create your own simply by doing an online search of DIY ones. I mentioned before that I have a one-to-one iPad classroom. If you happen to have a class set of iPads like myself, it's important to assign them. I do this by a number order that correlate with classroom line order, which is basically alphabetical order. Any new students that join the class after the iPads have been assigned are just added to the bottom of the list. I do this in order for students to be able to continue working on their art projects so they can pick up where they left off on the previous art day. It allows me to check for inappropriate activity with the iPad history and timestamps. I teach green screen to my 4th and 5th graders and came up with this green screen hack. There's a good chance that your school has one of the old pull-down projection screens in storage, or even a pull-down map would work. See if you can get one and paint it green with cheap wall paint. Hang it in a convenient area of your room. It works great since it just rolls back up and out of the way when you're not using it. The age-old question of what do the students do if they finish early? Typically, I have them add more details, write about their art, or draw something on the back. I'm sure you get the drift and have the same issue. I personally love early finisher stations. Honestly, it all depends on what you have available and what you are comfortable with. Unfortunately, due to COVID, this is my first year not being able to use these stations. I truly cannot wait to be able to use them again. I still want to share my ideas with you for future post-pandemic reference. The first one is the Drawing Center. It has cheap paper, stencils, rubbing plates, how to draw books, and art-related books for those students wishing to read. They are able to use basic supplies, including scissors, glue, and tape at this station. The Math and Engineering Center is my favorite among all my students. It includes Legos, wooden blocks, straw builders, brain flakes, tangrams, weaving loops, and magnetic fractals. I love giving kids choices and believe that playing, creating, collaborating, and constructing are vital to their learning. Not only does this allow them to explore the engineering design process, but also teaches them to work with others. I recycle dried out markers into watercolor paint. Make sure that they are water-based markers and not permanent ones. Take off the lids of light colors and let them sit in water overnight. I personally happen to use scented markers, which makes the watercolor paint scented. By the way, the lids of these and the marker bottoms make great clay stamps. When my students are painting, whether it be acrylics, watercolors, tempera, or clay glazes, I like to use paint stations. Each table has a different color paint with 5 or 6 brushes. The students take their art with them and rotate to the colors that they wish to use. They leave the brush with the color they found it with when they are ready to move on. It makes cleanup so much easier and keeps the paint from mixing. I simply refill the paint cups, seal them up for the next day, and wash the brushes. I found a simple solution for keeping up with which group clay projects belong to. If you're like me, I usually have around 200 clay projects in the works at one time. They're generally all in different phases and a bit difficult to keep up with which group or class they belong to. While some classes are in the drying phase, others are being fired, some are ready for painting or glazing. I used to make sort of a map and label it which groups were where. Now I simply take a scrap of clay from each class and press it flat and write the group or classroom teacher's name on it. That piece goes wherever their class projects do. You can fire these pieces over and over and it does not affect them. I like to use placemats from chipboard or cardboard. I use these over and over for various things in my room to assist with keeping my tables clean, including Sharpies, watercolor paint, and printmaking. Speaking of printmaking, did you know that you can use styrofoam meat trays? Simply clean them, cut them on the paper cutter to the size needed, and use a pencil to draw your design pressed into them. Next, color with a water-based marker and press onto your paper. I like to use it to make borders around for their art. I am not a fan of cookie cutter art where everyone's art looks exactly the same. I have found though that sometimes I need my younger students to draw a circle a certain size in order for them to have room for their details for a particular project. I used to give them a stencil to trace for this, but I figured out a way to show them the size needed for the particular projects by simply using their hand. This hack has students ball their hand into a fist and pretend to put it in an imaginary bubble. Next, draw the bubble. Move your hand and finish it. It also works for bigger circles with fingers stretched out. Do you find your yarn entangles and students just chopping at the rolls, trying to destroy them? I enjoy doing weaving with my fourth graders, and I have found that yarn dispensers from coffee cans work great. I simply peel off the label, cut an X in the lid, and place a ball of yarn inside with the tail poking out of the opening. Make sure to demonstrate how to use it and show them the length that you need for whatever your particular project is. I like to compare it to a tape dispenser. By the way, if you don't drink an abundance of coffee like I do, I guarantee you have some parents at your school that do. All you have to do is ask and you'll receive more than you can probably use. In closing, allow students to see the real you. Be completely authentic. They just want you to be real. It's okay to make mistakes and admit them. In fact, students will respect you for it. And if they respect you, they'll learn from you. See you next time.